everyone. This is Whitney, and welcome back to another episode of Spastic Chatter. If you're new here, Spastic Chatter is a platform meant to feature those in the Cerebral Palsy community, and I get together with individuals with CP, like myself, to have an uncensored chat, if you will, about what it's like living with this type of disability. And for this week, I have with me Olivia, and she is a fellow podcaster. She has a podcast called Living My Best Disabled Life. So I thought it would be interesting to have a chat with her and interview her from podcaster to podcaster, if that makes sense. So before we get on to the conversation, I will let Olivia introduce herself. So take it away, Olivia.
Hi, everyone. I'm Olivia. I'm the host of Living My Best Disabled Life, which is a disability awareness podcast. I'm also a journalism student at USF. I have spastic diplegia, cerebral palsy.
Awesome. So I'm curious. I want to take it back to kind of like your origin story. Like, why did you create your podcast? Like, what is your why?
Well, similar to you and how you started during the pandemic, I wanted to get into some form of advocacy, but I didn't know where to start, and I didn't want to do something that everyone does. I didn't want to just volunteer somewhere, or I wanted to be unique. So I'm a journalism student, so I wanted to kind of combine journalism with advocacy, and that's kind of where Living My Best Disabled Life came from. And I wanted to show that, even though we might have disabilities, that doesn't make us any less of, successful people. And we can be living our best lives. There are ups and there are downs, but it's not all negative.
I love that. And do you think, you said that you're a journalism major, and you kind of answered this already, but do you think having the educational background helps you with in media? Do you think that helps you a little bit with preparing for your podcast and things like that?
That's 100% why I actually started the master's program, because I wanted a way to kind of teach myself, how to ask the best questions, or how to structure a good podcast, or even how to even I also want to be a freelance writer, so how to tell people stories in the best way possible,
Yeah, that's awesome. And before we got on this call, I'm just talking about the differences between podcasters, is that for instance, not many people know the behind the scenes of Spastic Chatter, but I don't really prepare my questions ahead of time unless somebody asks for them or something. And you prepare your questions ahead of time, so I just kind of depends on the host of the podcast and how they process things and how they want the flow of the podcast to go. Would you kind of do you kind of agree with that or relate to that? No. And
I mean, yeah, I definitely think that it depends on the host, and it also depends on the topic / the guest. Some require a lot more research before you get on the call with the person, and some it's generally more organic, I guess, if that makes sense.
Yes, I love how you kind of explain that, because if a topic is takes a lot of like I'm struggling. I'm struggling. I'm struggling with words right now. But if it's like if it's like a very like if it's gonna be like a really heavy topic and it's like a really prominent topic right now, that definitely takes some research because you don't want to just jump in and like you want to be prepared, if that makes sense. And kind of like I want to kind of talk about like how do you go about reaching out, like finding guests and like for that whole process.
So some of the people I've had on my podcast are like my friends. But others, I kind of just DM them on Instagram or send them an email, hoping I'll get an email back. But sometimes you don't get emails back, and that's like it's not all like you're not gonna get every guest you want on your podcast on your podcast. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, that's kind of like my process too. I always say that on my episodes that, like Instagram is like kind of like my go-to. Like I get more responses through Instagram DMs than anything else. But like I reach out through like email, Instagram, like anywhere I can like find a person, and I have my little pitch saved that I send everyone like so that's awesome. So I kind of like browse through your podcast, but I'm curious, and you don't have to answer this if you don't want to, but do you have a favorite like a favorite episode so far? Or did you interview a guest that like you're like I can't believe I just had them on one podcast? Like, have you had one of those?
Actually, I have had a few that I'm like, oh my god, I can't believe I had them on the podcast. And then even like I've one of my favorite guests I've had on multiple times, and I'm like, it still gets me every time. I'm like, oh my god, I can't believe I just interviewed that person. But so I'll explain. I don't know if you know who Kia Brown is.
Yes.
She's the author of The Pretty One.
Yes.
I'm a huge fan of her. And we're both, well, she's a journalist. I want to be a journalist. So, like, I just love her writing and I love her as a person. So, when I got to interview her for the podcast, I was, like, fangirling so hard.
That's awesome. Like, I know I've definitely had some of those moments, and like it's kind of a testament to like you never know what'll happen. All you can do is reach out, and if they, like you said, like we've kind of mentioned before in this episode, like if they don't respond, they don't respond. Like that's the worst that could happen. Pretty much. Like it's all about taking chances to get those guests. You know what I mean? So that's awesome.
What I also find interesting is that like after I've had people on my podcast, I don't know if you get this too, but like they become like friends to me. Like we may not live in the same area or whatever, but they become internet friends.
Yeah. And like I don't know, I completely relate to that. Like you follow each other's journey, and like I've had people on my podcast, and it's led to opportunities after that because we become like acquainted, and like if an opportunity pops up, like they're like, hey, when you check this out, and like vice versa, if I see anything like that I think they'd be interested in, I'm like, hey, you should check this out. Like it's like kind of like we're in each other's networks now, if you know what I mean. So that's awesome.
And then another person that I absolutely loved having on my podcast is Rebecca Tofsig. She's the author of Sitting Pretty, The View from My Ordinary Resilient Disabled Body. Man, that title's so long. But yeah, I like she she's now like always there for like any writing advice or whatever. I can email her, she'll like get back to me. I want to be a freelance writer. She's a freelance writer, and I'll ask her for advice. She'll like send me resources. It's amazing the connections that you can make through having your own podcast, or even just any form of interviewing people, whether it's a podcast or you're writing an article about them.
That's very cool, and I love how you've made all these connections with like freelance writers, and like because that's where you want your career to be. So that's very awesome, and like you have that support now that you can like lean on and things like that as your career unfolds. Those are definitely very good references to have in people. So I'm curious, Olivia, what's your future goals with your podcast? Do you have any like thing that like stands out?
So some of my goals are just to like continue to grow it. I've had it for like about almost 3 years. And I just want to continue to grow it, get some more guests on it, have it more visible and out there, because I don't know if you feel this way, but it takes a lot of work to like just get people to really know your podcast.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you might be recording episodes and not getting as many views or plays as you want, but a lot of times that doesn't matter as much. It's more about the impact, but at the same time, you still want to reach as many people as possible.
Totally, I can totally relate to that. And like even though some episodes might not get that many plays and things like that, just, kind of going off what you said, it just takes that one listener to like catapult it, like, because I've gotten sponsorships off of episodes that I didn't think they would go anywhere, but it just takes that one listener to make an impact and to make a relationship. So yeah, I can totally relate. Do you I'm curious if you have the same process that I do. Like, can you talk about like like recording a podcast from like start to finish? Do you use a Zoom like I use Zoom, and then I upload the recording to Anchor, like, or Spotify for podcasters, and they changed it, and then it distributes it to all the major podcast platforms, and then I also upload it to YouTube. Do you have that same process, or do you do it a little bit differently?
I actually do it the same way, except I don't usually upload it to YouTube. I typically just use the audio and not the visual, because in my feeling towards that is that sometimes the visual can be like a little bit distracting when it's a podcast and you're trying to listen to like what people are saying,
Yeah, I totally.
rather than like watching them talk. You know what I mean?
I totally get it. And that's cool that we can have like that we can like talk about those differences from again podcaster to podcaster. I'm curious if there's anything that we haven't touched on about your podcast or like life in general that you want to discuss. Did we kind of like touch on touch on anything on everything about podcasting? I think
another interesting thing is that like every like although some podcasts might have like a little bit of a different goal, whenever there's like a disability awareness podcast in any form, it still like makes the same or similar impact. Like mine, I don't know if you know this, but mine is, so I do have people with CP on it, but not just people with CP. I have people with spinal cord injuries. I have people with spina bifida on it, or any range, all these ranges of disabilities. But it's interesting that like I actually have a question for you. Do you find it like hard to, I don't know, find as many people with CP to interview? Like, do you ever run out? Because if I were to like have just a podcast that that solely was based on life with CP, I feel like I'd eventually run out of people with CP to interview.
No, I haven't. I haven't ran out yet. It's been 3 years, and I just made a post that I've had like 110 episodes so far, and I haven't ran out yet. But I also do what's called Spastic Chatter specials. So I've had like companies reach out to me, and like, so if I think a product or a company would benefit the cerebral palsy community, I do what's called Spastic Chatter specials. But to your point is that I'm very like, I don't know the word, but like, I'm very like into the disability community. I work for a disability organization, so like I know like tons of people with the disabilities and with cerebral palsy. If that kind of answers your question, but I can see your point, and hopefully that does not happen to me. But if it does, I will take another angle and I'll keep it moving.
What I do sometimes is I will reuse the same people, but use a different topic.
Yeah, totally. That makes sense. That's awesome. So at the end of every episode, Olivia, I kind of ask my guests if they have any advice for those who may be listening or watching. So, do you have any advice for somebody that wants to start their own podcast, or any kind of advice in general?
Oh, man, I have a lot of advice, but I will just stick to a few things. If you want to start a podcast, don't be afraid to. Like, it might seem daunting at first. But as long as you, like, if you have a topic that you're really, really passionate about and you want to talk to other people that are passionate about similar topics, go ahead, do it. It doesn't have to be like super produced or like, I mean, there are so many variations of podcasts. Some are super produced, some are more conversational, some are more authentic in the sense of like it doesn't seem as structured. So however you want to create the podcast, do it. And just because maybe some people might think, oh, well, maybe you don't have enough things to say. Even if you yourself think that maybe you don't have enough things to say, or important topics to discuss, just take that time to like believe in yourself. If you really want to do something, go ahead and do it. Don't let what other people or what you think of yourself hold you back.
I love that advice. So just to sum it up in like a couple words, just basically take the leap and believe in yourself. That's very cool. I love it. So Olivia, where can people follow you on social media and like hear your podcast and things like that?
So my personal account is Olivia_Murphy, but with like 2 Y's. And then my podcast account is Living My Best Disabled Life.
Awesome. And I will put that in.
You can listen to my podcast on everywhere that you listen to podcasts. So it goes on Anchor and then or Spotify for podcasters or whatever they call it now. And it distributes it to all the streaming services.
Awesome. I will put all of your links in the description for people to check out. And thank you, Olivia, for agreeing to be a guest on Spastic Chatter. I really enjoyed talking with you. And for those of you listening or watching and you want to be a guest, feel free to reach out to me wherever you are experiencing this podcast, and I'd love to have you. And I will. I was gonna say I would see everyone next time, but yeah, check back for another episode. Thanks.
Thanks for having me.
Bye.